Okay, it looks like we're in and we can get started. Thank you all for joining us today.
Hello, can you all hear me? All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gerontological Society of America's Career Conversation. It's never too early to start exploring the non-financial aspects of retirement. I'm Dr. Rosamond Giovanni from University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio School of Nursing. I'm joined today by GSA members, Dr. Patty Slatem, Virginia Center on Aging and GSA Visiting Scholar, and Dr. Van Liu from University of Iowa College of Nursing. Van, Patty, and I are the members of GSA Career Conversations work group that plans the career conversations and mentoring consultancy. GSA Career Conversations provide a forum for an exchange of ideas about issues and strategies to build a successful career in gerontology. Now I'll turn it over to you, Wen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wen. Before we begin today's program, I would like to provide a few logistical considerations. Please keep your audio on mute during the event and submit your questions for the panelists through the Zoom chat. And all of us will be moderating the Zoom chat. This career conversation is being recorded and will be available after the event on the GSA website. Wondering what it means to be retired? Does retirement looks different today than it did for our parents? Much of the focus on preparing for retirement is on financial planning, and this is certainly necessary to afford the retirement we imagine for ourselves. Beyond the financial aspects, however, when and how should we start planning for like our own retirement? Today, a panel of GSA members will share how they have approached their own retirement journey and share tips for a successful transition to retirement.
To open today's career conversation, I would like to introduce our panelists. We are delighted to have two distinguished GSA members with us to share their perspectives on preparing for the non-financial aspects of retirement. First, we welcome Dr. Mary Heye, former faculty at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio School of Nursing. We are also pleased to have joining us Dr. Harvey Stearns, Professor Emeritus of Psychology, the University of Akron.
So hi, this is Patty, and each of our panelists have diverse experiences and perspectives on retirement. We look forward to learning from you in this conversation. I also retired in 2019 after 20 years on the faculty at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I appreciate so much the advice and coaching from colleagues who retired before me. And now we'll go ahead and get our discussion started with some questions for the panelists. Rosamond?
All right, so let me start. So how do you view retirement from your role in academia? Is your retirement what you expected? And how has your perspective changed since retiring?
Should we let Mary go first?
Yeah, anybody can go first.
Only if you insist. So I view my retirement as kind of a transition from, being a full-time faculty member with 3 legs of work and then transitioning to still involved in academia. So in terms of role, mine was more of a transition. I was chair of a dissertation committee when I decided to retire. So the graduate faculty said, no, we want you to continue. You'll be adjunct faculty. And then I was a dissertation committee member. They wanted me to continue. I had various roles like that, and adjunct faculty status allowed you to park on campus and to be involved in the activities. There was an evidence-based research center at the school too, and I was on the very big board of that program. And so I continued in that role, which involved conferences and, helping get speakers and that kind of thing. So when you talk about retirement, it's almost like it's a date at which you have to extricate yourself from the physical building. But at the same time, you're involved in activities that require some transition. And how you transition is really just up to you. I just happened to be involved in these activities that I felt a real need to continue. And is your retirement what you expected? I didn't have expectations, really. I kind of decided suddenly to retire. I had some issues with our new dean. I had some issues with the attitude of faculty, and they revolved around issues of integrity. And I had been there 30 years. I also had a good friend who had been there 40 years, and she had been one of my teachers actually in my baccalaureate program, and she was retiring. And I realized that there was this thing about academia in some schools, and that is that, the older you get, the more you get on that leg of getting close to retirement. Either people expect you to, or you never get off the runway, and people just want you to kind of gradually go away. And there's lots of reasons why that might happen in an institution. But I had seen this kind of devaluing of faculty as they aged, even though their contributions, which I could testify to, were extraordinary compared to the newer faculty members. So it was kind of a group of issues. And I think what happened is that one day I said to myself, okay, I'm going to take on all these new courses, and I have to co-teach with a couple of people. And you know what? I'm tired of fighting. I'm just tired. And I thought, I think I have better things to do with my time. And so I really wasn't quite ready to leave. But after talking to my friend or colleague who was retiring after 40 years, she was feeling much the same, except she had gone to part-time. But, we talked about it, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to retire. There's so much out there I can do. I'll do it. So I didn't really have any expectations, except that I've always been able to recover, kind of like a tennis player, you know how to make all the moves to get the ball. So I felt like no matter what I decided to do, I would be okay. And I think that, so my perspective, has it changed? I think what's changed is it surprised me, because as I was telling someone recently, I said, we need a CV for post-retirement rather than your CV from when you were a faculty member, because that really is the gist of what a successful retirement is about, perhaps. Anyway.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I think that I'm very much in sympathy with many of the things that you're saying. I'm in a different situation. I have been writing for close to 30 years, chapters and articles regarding self-management of career and retirement. So I have been looking at this, and not only that, but I taught a course for many years called Retirement Specialists, where we train people to run retirement education programs. I actually designed the transition program for my university. And I had a very active role on my campus, besides being an institute director for 45 years. I actually, with the 3 years of my transition period, I finished 50 years at the University of Akron, 45 years as institute director. And when I retired officially in 2017, I was 75 years of age. I'm presently 80. So I've always believed in working longer. It's something that it's actually been a family tradition. Members of my family, my father had department stores. He worked well into his 80s. We used to say in the Stearns family, you die in the aisle making a sale, but first you finish the sale. So this is the idea of working longer. But I must tell you that I have, if you look at the literature on retirement, everybody has today has their own path. And we classify different styles of retirement. Some people fit very much what Mary has talked about, and I think that's true of me, where we kind of gradually have continued to keep our activity levels, but there have been changes. Some people stop and they walk out and they never come back, and they never have anything to do with it. They do something entirely different. That's what we call a sharp retirement. Or we can have a more gradual approach, such as Mary and I fit, which is a kind of what's called a dull rather than sharp approach. When I retired, I was chair of university council, and I was allowed to continue to be chair of university council till I finished my term. I was not allowed to run again. So that was an unusual situation because I was still right in the middle of many issues on my campus, even though I was retiring. At the same time, I continued to be institute director, which meant that I was overseeing undergraduate and graduate certificate program and various projects. And I was representing my university in the age-friendly initiative that we started. I was co-chairing I was chair of age-friendly Akron, and then was co-chair of age-friendly Summit County. And then I must say that I have continued to have lots of activities. I'm currently president of the Board of Governors for the Accreditation for Gerontology Education Council, which is the group that accredits gerontology degree programs. I have continued teaching both at the University of Akron, Youngstown State University, and now Kent State University. Interestingly enough, I'm president-elect of our Retiree Association. I continue on numerous boards, including the Ohio Association of Gerontology and Education, the Board of the Area Agency. I am back as chair of the Commission on Aging of my city. And it's not that that I can't give these things up. Like Mary says, you have an expertise that is needed. And I do still serve on doctoral dissertations committees. I actually still go to lunch and learns and make my comments. But I think it's a matter of, that's my personal choice. I don't necessarily think, I have other colleagues who really have no interest in doing any of the things that I'm doing. And I think one of the things that if you take a lifespan approach and you look at different stages, I did the chapter on midlife and work for the Handbook of Midlife. And so a lot of the kind of reflection that goes on preliminarily to even thinking about work satisfaction in the latter parts of your career, really there's a lot of multidimensional aspects. If you've ever seen any of my work, I have a major flow diagram that's been around for a long time of many different vectors that influence people's decision to retire. And a lot of it has to do with your own sense of self and timing, your own personal reflection, your satisfaction with your relationship with your coworkers, your understanding how age is being treated in your organization. There are many vectors. I don't want to get into my full lecture mode here because, but I want to just tell you that it's not any one thing. It's a combination of vectors, and sometimes one of the reasons I believe that faculty development leaves are important is because people get tired, and that's one of the reasons why we have sabbaticals of faculty development leaves, because you get refreshed and you have another run. As you get later in your career, sometimes it's very difficult to step away because of your engagements. And one of the very unfair things about careers is the people who are very much involved in lots of things cannot break away easily. If they go on a faculty development leave, they leave their master's and doctoral students without their mentor there. If you you have to think about what it means to step away from all the work that you're doing, and so you have to come to terms with that. I think that one of the things that had guided me is the idea, first of all, of Robert Ashley's stages of retirement, where he talked about the remote phase when people kind of think even at the beginning of their careers about what's going to happen in retirement. Now, it's not usual, except that I advise people, even though we're not talking about finances today, that when you start a job, that you figure out what are the retirement benefits, so you have the freedom to plan your retirement. Because one of the things that we know about retirement is that if you don't plan, then life happens. And the question is, do you want to be in control, or at least the illusion of control, as you think of your work cycle, or do you want to let things just happen? So I want to just kind of point out that I don't believe there's any one right path. I think everybody has to carve this out for themselves. I've had mentors, though, that have worked way beyond what I've worked. Jim Biren, who was one of my mentors, worked well into his 90s. One of my major professors, Warner Heye, continues even now in his late 90s to be continued. He and his wife just finished the new handbook of psych of aging. I've had other colleagues who, again, Paul Baltus, when he retired as head of my major professor, when he retired as head of the Max Planck Institute, continued then a second career basically at the University of Virginia before his unfortunate death way too early. So I think we have to understand, and this just is an issue of academia. Academia has just the same issues as the business world. And deans and presidents and campus, their attitudes, the research is clear that their attitudes about employees is no different, whether it's in business or whether it's in higher education. I'll stop there, but I just want to say that I am enjoying my time in retirement, and I still enjoy teaching. And if you'd asked me when I started gerontology as a 29-year-old professor, and if you asked me if I was going to still be teaching at 80, I would have said, I don't think so. But the fact of the matter is, I knew a lot about gerontology when I finished my training in 29. Now at 80, I know even more.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heye and Dr. Stearns. Actually, I think your responses to the first question addressed like our second question in terms of what factors influenced your decision to retire and what are the activities you engage in since retiring. Are there anything you would like to add to it?
Well, I'll be happy to talk about the fact that I don't know what Mary's situation was, but I was in state teachers retirement, which is the same retirement system as the public school teachers. Most universities, the professors are in TIA-CREF, which, by the way, there's an interesting piece of history there. It was created back in 1915, 1910, when Osler, the famous medical leader from Johns Hopkins, went to Oxford, and he gave a speech about how you have to watch out for those older faculty members. And Andrew Carnegie, there was headlines everywhere about this issue that older faculty may be dragging down higher education. So Andrew Carnegie gave the first money to start TIA-CREF with the idea that we would have resources so that people wouldn't retire. I also had the experience of advising the National Research Council when they did the uncapping of the age 70 rule. I don't know if you realize until 1993, you could mandatorily retire tenured faculty. That changed, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act then changed over time. And in my own work, I was a part of the National Academy of Science Institute of Medicine panel that changed the work rules, recommended the changes for work rules for airline pilots going from 60 to 65. So I've been very much interested in both the psychological and physical changes and how those affect people's ability to continue to work. So this is, this is not simple what you're asking us here, because there are so many factors. So I would just like to say that there was a financial reason. why I decided to retire, even though we're not supposed to go there. I was at 100% of salary in my retirement pension fund because at 40, I had 46 years in, and then I worked for 3 more years. I, by the way, because of my consulting practice, I then had paid Social Security. So I was collecting full Social Security. And it wasn't until I really retired from the state teachers pension that my Social Security was then reduced, because there's something called coordination of benefit. So I just want to point out that the important thing is to have the resource base. So when I teach psych of adulthood and aging, we have a whole section on work and retirement. And I can tell you, and I'll mention this again later, undergraduates are very interested in how they can plan their own future. So could I share my diagram? I don't have it up on my computer, no, unfortunately. But I think that if you go look up my articles, you'll find many examples of that. Anyway, I just want to point out.
And we can share it as a resource along with the recording afterwards. Yeah.
But I want to point out, once you have and this is from the research on retirement, when people think they have enough money to retire, many people do. Yeah, those of us in academia, we're the worst people when it comes to retirement, frankly, because it's so much tied to our sense of identity. And a lot of people really enjoy, they do their work to have the money to do the things they really want to do. We, on the other hand, I believe, at least it's true in my case, I can't speak for everyone in academia, but we are so tied up with everything we do academically. It's our total identity, our feelings of accomplishment and so forth. We're all tied to that. Even though we're parents and have children and grandchildren, we still have that sense of identity as a professor. And by the way, my friend Sarah Ricks, many years ago, sent me a book called Losing It, which is by a professor at Yale, who talks about the fact that, faculty think they have this legend in their own mind syndrome. So the question is, when should you stop? In fact, my address when I was president of Division 20 of APA was work till you drop and knowing when to stop. Because you have the issue of competence and discompetence. We just have a new chapter I did with my son, Dr. Anthony Stearns, in the latest handbook, Fiedler's new handbook of aging and work. And we're starting to talk about discompetence, which is an issue, especially in nursing and physicians, but discompetence can be in any profession. Anyway, I don't want to keep going on and on, which is the occupational hazard of us professors.
I just wanted to add something to what you said. And there were 3 pieces of advice that I received during my academic career. And the first one was don't put all your eggs in one basket. People won't remember and people won't care. And this was from a retired faculty, esteemed Professor Emeritus. And I was probably mid-career, juggling child and career and family and aging parents. And she was very clear that I needed to invest the time in what was going to pay off, and she said that because of her career. Now, she never married, and she was a caregiver for her parents. But what she was saying is, you invest all this time and energy in your school and your students and this career, and you need to keep cultivating other things. And I think the second piece of advice is, I'm kind of if you want it, go for it. And if it doesn't suit you, then give it up. And so, there were a couple of times during my career where I felt that way. And especially when it was related to salary or other opportunities. And so I always, it was a constant decision, and it was allowing me to, not feel tied to my career. In other words, I valued my job, I valued what I did. But as you said, my identity was somewhere else. And so I found that in my time in academia, there were like two different kinds of faculty. And the first one was the person who became a faculty member, decided how many years they needed, and then they were out of there. And you know, the age, the number of years, all that kind of thing. So they had it all calculated. And sometimes they'd be very clear about it. Then there were faculty that were there for the duration, that were very committed to what they were doing. And not that the other faculty member from the number one category weren't. It's just that the second group seemed to really focus on their career, who they were, what their reputation was, what their publications were. And they made that known to everybody. And I often sat back and thought, I don't think I want to belong to either group, you know? and it was an observation over time. What's interesting is that second group that stayed, those are the people that you were talking about, Dr. Stern. They just, some of them are still there. And that's good, except that I've heard them say to me, we're so glad you're so happy, you look great. You know, I don't know what I would do with my life, you know, if I left the school. I don't know how it would be. And they always have to kind of recreate something that they're really good at so they can stay in their role without having to go to the clinical area and be in hospitals or clinics or other things like that. So I admire them. But it makes me think that it's it can be either or it can be somewhere in between where you get to make decisions based on the circumstances of the time. So I just wanted to share that.
So I think one of the things that we can learn from that is that Newgart and Havinghurst and Tobin many years ago were right when they talked about different styles of contrasting activity theory with disengagement theory. In fact, you know, this notion of a busy older person is a happy older person works for some of us, but not all.
Mhm.
And if you remember, there are plenty of people in research who have disengaged who are very happy too. I've gotten much more interested in disengagement because as you do retire, people, you know, in that theory, you are withdrawing from society, society is withdrawing from you. I think it's the second part that's interesting. Over
Yeah.
time, there are things that happen that you can see that disengagement is happening. You've served on committees for many years, and now you've finished your cycle. I've stayed on boards with lot longer than a lot of people. Why? Out of my interest. But I recently had an experience where, for the first, I had been one of the longest serving presidents of an agency, and when it came time to select a new director for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't asked to be on the selection committee. That's an example of how that happens. And when I asked why that didn't happen, the person who was head of the didn't know even who I was, even though I was the longest serving board member. So that can happen to you. There can be little insults that no one really intends to do, but it happens. So you have to have resilience. You know, one of those things about late life gerontology is resilience. And so let's understand that. But we have an obligation as retirees to be nice people to work with. No one wants to work with a shithead, by the way. I just want to point that out. I don't want to be delicate about it. If you are one of the old curmudgeon type things, I'm quoted in a book done out of Wharton School about retirement on that very point, that you have to be able to get along with colleagues. And if you can't do it, if you don't want to anymore, then maybe you should get off out of the business. You know, you have to play nice. And you can sit in a meeting and you can hear an idea that somebody brought up, and you think to yourself, I heard that idea 20 years ago. It was a terrible idea then. It's still a terrible idea, but you can't just say that. You have to kind of decide what you're going to do. And also, having long service, you know the history. And sometimes people want to hear the history, and sometimes they really don't want to. So you have to learn to be a little judicious about that. I don't know, Mary, if you've had those experiences, but
I have, yes.
Well, and I was going to add, it's interesting. I had gotten advice real early in my career when I was a new assistant professor. Put as much money as you can in your 401k. Blah, blah. You need to plan for the financial part of your later years. And I did that, thinking that it would just give me more options later, right? The more I can do now to make sure I'm ready on this financial part, then I'll just be able to call the shots of what I want to do and when I want to do it. So I had the interesting experience where my father, he got leukemia, and he was in his 60s, and he had a really quick, he was gone in 3 years, right? And all the things that he had wanted to do in retirement and he'd talked about never happened. And I don't know, it was almost like a little bit of a wake-up call of, if there's things you want to do, you can't just keep putting them off. And I loved my career in academic pharmacy 1,000 miles an hour, right? But then there were other things. And I find that since I made this decision to retire early, I have a lot more time to write than I was able to carve out. I have a lot more time to do some other things that ultimately in relationships and mentoring and other things, right? And so we can all, if we think about it ahead of time, it does give us options to kind of carve out where we want to be. And we're going to have experiences in our own lives that influence when and how we want to do this, right? And I'm curious, Dr. Stearns and Dr. Heye, about your experiences about preparing, because I made a decision and took 5 years to unwind everything I was doing so that it could be passed on. No graduate students got left, no, it was a real transition time over about 5 years, because I felt I wasn't going to leave anyone by making this decision. I wasn't going to harm someone else. And I wanted to make sure my people worked in my team were all promoted. They had their, I just laid it out over 5 years. And I find that's not what usually happens, but it can. And I'm just curious what your experiences were in actually preparing to make the time of retirement. Did you find it smooth, challenging? Just curious.
Well, I can speak to that to some degree. I did some planning about, and even though finances are not the thing, they do provide structure. So I went through a couple of the kind of retirement planning seminars that some of our major accounting firms do. And that's when I realized that my wife expected me to make twice as much money in retirement than I was making even when I was working. So I realized right off the bat that if we were going to do the kind of living and traveling, we better get on the ball here. But the fact of the matter is that you have to start to make decisions. And the point that you made, you have to develop a multidimensional lifestyle all through your career. You can't just wait to the end. That's and I know the quality of life slows you down, but I think that's one of the problems in academia, because if you're in a high production, high level department where you have to meet grant requirements and publication requirements, and I did all of that, and I was always amazed that very few people want to do 2 full-time jobs for one salary, which is what I did for most of my career, because I was also in the Office of Geriatric Medicine at my medical school, and I was very involved. And I always, that was the pace that I kept. And why did I keep that pace? Because my own mentors kept that pace. And there were a lot of people around me would say, Harvey, why are you working so hard? You don't have to in this environment. And I said, oh no, that's not, the local standard isn't what I'm going by. So you have to really think about who are you playing to? Are you playing to some goal setting approach that you really believe in? Or are you doing it just out of total neuroticism? Although I have a phrase: never underestimate the motivating power of neuroticism, because it drives productivity in academia. At least that's my experience.
Well, you asked about preparing and about 20 years after I'd been at the university, a secretary who I was really good friends with, and I were chatting one day, and she said, well, I'm going to go up to the Texas retirement system, and I'm going to find out about this, this, and this. And I said, wow, I never knew about this, this, and this. And she said, oh, yes, I've been investigating it. So I said, okay, I have an afternoon off. I'm going to take it off and we'll go together. And we did. And that was my first experience of really financially planning. You know, I knew what I'd signed up for with the Texas teacher retirement system. I had a sense of what, you know, that was going to provide for me. But there were so many other options in terms of how that money would be used, and used at your death, or it could, you know, all kinds of options. So I learned a lot in that session, and it caused me then to go to various sessions that were available at the time about retirement from the state of Texas and the education system. So I began asking people about the different options they had chosen. So in a way, I had started early on by making that career. Of course, a career choice to go with, I should say financial choice, to go with TRS, or the retirement system. And then I think that preparing for the actual retirement, I felt comfortable financially. And so for the next 10 years of my career, I really didn't worry about that. And I focused more on what I wanted to do in my career and where I wanted to dedicate myself. I made decisions that, you know, didn't get me full professorship, and that's okay. I'm okay with those decisions. They were the right ones at the right time. Because I decided to devote myself more clinically to what I wanted to do and be good at. And I think that in the preparation, after I made my decision to retire, it had to do, first of all, with physical extrication from my office, which was learning how to throw out things that you had developed, whole courses, you know, and that were still very relevant and you shared in various ways. But, you know, leaving your office wasn't such a big deal, except it was hard to throw things away. And, you know, the symbolism of what you're leaving is more evident at the time. So there's a little bit of grief. There wasn't much. Then I think the other thing is the mental piece about, okay, I'm no longer a faculty member, I'm an adjunct faculty member. So I realized soon that while it brought some recognition, it didn't bring the same level of respect. And so in my preparation for retirement, I looked at other people who had retired and continued as adjunct faculty, and I thought, okay, I better prepare myself for that. And the last part, I think, is emotional preparing. And that is, do I belong here? Am I part of this tribe? How much have I given? Have I done my best? And then leaving it there. And so it took some time for me to think through this. But in the end, I felt very good and very secure in my decision. But it's funny, when I read that question, I thought to myself, how did I prepare? Did I prepare really? I mean, I made the decision, you know, I had no time frame. I just made it. But I realized that there was some preparation involved in the 6 months later that followed the decision and the announcement of my retirement.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. When we had this transition after retirement program, it was renewed year by year by the provost. And the third year that I was doing it, the provost said to me, you know, Harvey, you really might consider transferring the directorship to one of your colleagues. That you've done that for a long time. And I had to agree that I had done it a long time, much longer than I really wanted to, in the sense that I was very happy for other people to come in and take that role, but no one really wanted to do it. This two jobs issue. But he said, I will renew you for a third year if you start the transition to another person. Unfortunately, I had a colleague who was very supportive, who was very willing to help with that transition. So we were able to do that in a very facilitated way. I had the same issue. I had a suite that had multiple offices in it, and I had close to 50 years of journals. And of course, people don't want those journals anymore. So it was very hard. No one told me when I started back in the late 60s to collect journals that we wouldn't need them anymore to the same extent. And so that was hard to see those go into the recycling bin. I moved out of the big office to a one next door, and I have a workroom, and I have a major office at home. And with COVID, I think COVID helped me because it forced me to stay home, because I was someone who was in the office every day. And I learned, because of COVID, I was teaching online, that I could be comfortable doing that. So my big task right now is to consolidate two major personal libraries, because I have always been an extensive book collection. I probably have one of the largest collections of aging literature that many people would ever have or ever want. And my son, who's in the field, and I say to him, Tony, someday this can all be yours. He turns green. So I don't think that's the answer. I wouldn't say I'm a hoarder, but it is a collection. I put it that way. But that's part of it, and I realize at some point that I may not be able to have all of this. We may have to scale down. When your son's a gerontologist and said, Dad, have you thought about maybe you should scale down? I don't like to hear that. So I know we know what we should be doing, but we don't always do that. And for me, retirement has really meant I stopped teaching in the summer, because for many years I taught every summer. Why? To make money for my family. But now I've for at least 3 years, we've been able to spend the whole summer at our family summer home. So that's my definition of retirement. But there are physical changes. I had expected to be at the International Society of Gerotechnology in Korea this fall. My son was the Secretary General of the Gerotechnology Society, but a little spinal stenosis made that not possible. So one of the things that you really have to deal with are some changing health factors. But while I was working, I'd already done a shoulder and 2 hip replacements, and I kept going without any problems at all. So the physical aspects of your aging have to be considered. It can slow you down a little bit, but not a lot. And by the way, physical therapy works. But that's part of it too. You really have to, and the health. And by the way, we haven't talked about, aligning your desires with your spouse and family. I certainly, my wife is a PhD sociologist, market researcher, and we've had a consulting practice for years. Her attitude is she'd like to work as little as possible now, but we still have our Alzheimer's intervention therapy, which is still in demand. So I just want to say that let's not forget the family relationship aspects. And yes, it's true, our relationship to family members, cousins, and siblings takes on new meaning in later life. And that's important. And now I'm old enough that classmates of mine, unfortunately, are dying. When you get to be 80, you start to lose colleagues and friends that you really don't want to lose. And that's a reality. So I think something that Mary said is really important. You may have I've had great relationships with every president, and the newest one, I have a relationship, but it's not the same. And a new dean comes in, and you can build a relationship, but it's not the same. And you can be respected, but it's not the same. And when somebody said just yesterday, meet Dr. Stearns, he's helping out around here, which meant I'm teaching. When I heard I'm helping out, well, that's probably a good assessment. I am helping out, but it's not what I wanted to hear.
Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, we always hear about, financial aspects of retirement, but this is like physical preparation, psychological preparation, emotional preparation. There's so much to get ready. And I really like, Dr. Heye, when you mentioned about, having a CV about after retirement, and the transition course you mentioned, Dr. Stearns, about after, during the retirement phase or transitioning to retirement. So my next question would be, tips do you have for successful transition into retirement?
Well,
Well, I think I would say planning. Planning, but planning doesn't mean planning means thinking about it. And getting in touch with yourself. I think one of the biggest issues is, how do you get in touch with your own thinking? I say when I get in touch with myself in terms of time, I have to be walking the streets of my hometown of Skowhegan, Maine, to get a sense of my life. And you don't have to necessarily go to a particular location, but the fact of the matter is, you have to kind of do your own self-appraisal, self-assessment, self-reflection, because you can do this without ever getting in touch with your real feelings. So you have to, and by the way, let's understand something, that there are some people who are very unhappy in this whole process. I mean, Mary and I seem to be have rolled with the punches, and we've gotten through it okay, and we're doing fine now, and we're glad that we're doing what we're doing. But there are some people who are very bitter. Some people who have felt forced to leave, or they took an early buyout. Why? Because it was a good deal, but they really had been retired, and they didn't really want to do it anymore. And that's another problem. What about the people who really aren't functioning very well? Do you really want them to continue? And so that's very difficult when you have colleagues who really should stop. And I say, every time I get my classroom evaluations, I say, well, when they go to all to hell, I'm stopping. So far, I've been able to fake good. But but there may be a time. I've had colleagues who stopped teaching because they didn't feel they had any rapport with their classes anymore. That the cohort differential was just too much. And on my rate your professors, they say, well, he's an old guy and he's active in his field, and he rambles sometimes, but he is interesting. So if you use rate your professor, that's not the example that you necessarily want to have either.
Well, a couple of tips that I have are things that I did, and kind of, again, that was that transition that just kind of happened for me. And first of all, I was always involved in my professional organizations. And so whether it was the American Nurses Association, and then the Texas chapter, the local chapter, the Clinical Nurse Specialist, which was our kind of specialty organization in nursing. And anyway, I was always involved at various levels in organizations. And then my other specialty was pain management. So I was American Pain Society, pain management nurses. And I developed those relationships in those organizations throughout my career. And so when I retired, I still continued to go to the conferences because I was still very interested. And I may have lost a little bit respect as adjunct faculty, but when I showed up at those meetings, I was respected as the person I was, and so that always felt good. And I felt that difference, definitely. I'd worked on committees, chaired committees, helped with different initiatives in the various organizations. So I continued that, and I still continue to this day, 10 years later. Being a member of the American Nurses Association, I love getting their emails. I want to know what's going on with my profession. I want to know what the issues are. And then, I also had other interests during my academic career. I've been like a lifelong member of the League of Women Voters. I've always loved nature. So I was always looking at different websites regarding native plants and ecology and environmental conservation. So when I retired, it was just like those things continued. So those were my interests, and they still sustain me. So even though there was a portion missing, what wasn't missing was working every night and every weekend. And I will tell you, one time my daughter came up late at night and she said, "Are you still at work?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, I'm telling you one thing, I'm never gonna become a teacher. Never, ever." She said, "You never leave your desk once you get home. And then on the weekends, you always have a couple of hours every day." And I never thought about that, you know. She's not a teacher, let's say that. But I think that as you are engaged in your career, you still have to maintain those interests in some way. You may not be able to actively participate like the League of Women Voters, but at least I knew what was going on, who was giving a seminar, what some of the issues were. And so I kept those other areas of interest close. And I think the other thing is taking advantage of those organizations. For example, the League of Women Voters had a meeting, and I sat next to this woman who was a physician, and I had known her. And she said, "I'm starting up a voter registration initiative. Are you interested?" And I said, "Well, of course I am." And so this was about a year after I retired. And so she developed this citywide organization where previous educators go into high schools and register students to vote. And not just sitting at a table. You go into the classroom, you do a non-political, nonpartisan presentation about how to register to vote. And that initiative, and I would name about 5 others, just happened by happenstance, because I took the opportunity to go, to listen, to say, sure, I'll try that. So, I could just list a whole bunch of activities. I know another piece of advice I got from a retired professor in another field. He told me, do not accept any obligations for 2 years after you retire. Then you'll be fully adjusted and then can make decisions. And, I continued my interests in things, but I was asked to sit on an institutional review board, and I was asked to teach courses and do these other things. I said, no. But after 2 years, I decided that, yeah, it was time. And so I taught for Georgetown for 2 years in their graduate program for the Doctor of Nursing Practice. And I became a member of the IRB. I'm still a member of the hospital, one of the hospital in town here, the IRB. And so if I had never put myself in that position of meeting other people, staying engaged, I wouldn't have had those opportunities. But I think the other part of that is saying yes, because then if you engage in it and it's not your cup of tea, then you can always say, I tried it, it was good. In my case, I've just developed lifelong friendships. I became a master naturalist because I've always been interested in trees. If I open the window behind me, you see a dozen oak trees. And so in that organization, I met other people, and we have developed friendships. So to me, it's just been an amazing journey in the last 10 years that has allowed me to feel, fully engaged and in a healthy way. I don't consider myself aging just yet. I'm only 70, but I think that those are the kinds of activities or tips I would give other people as they consider retirement.
Well, I think it's great because I can support everything that you've said based on my own experience. I have continued to be active in the Gerontological Society, the Association for Gerontology and Higher Ed, the American Psychological Association. In fact, I was part of just a national group doing research on retirement and the use of late life psychologists. I feel exactly the same way that you do, that staying involved in the profession is really important. But I will say one thing. I wouldn't be doing many of the things that I'm doing if I didn't have the support of my younger colleagues and my students. Because if you don't have that, then it doesn't work. I saw, I think Nina put up something about we should be enhancing intergenerational relationships. I think that's absolutely true, with colleagues of all different career stages. There's a lot that we can do to support our emerging scholars. And one of the things that I've taken, I also have lists of community activities as well. I happen to have a theme, not only as a gerontologist, but I'm also an old house restorer. I happen to collect old cars. There's a theme there, so that, and I have continued to, my wife and I have a kind of a hobby in Korean drama and Korean history. And so we've done that, and have enjoyed traveling. I think the thing that's unique though, COVID really, for those of us who are at this stage, did make a difference because it put us in touch with a lot of different things about our vulnerability. When I had to make a choice last year of going into a live classroom at age 79, I had to really think about it. And I decided, yes, we can't be so fragile that we can't take on these roles. So I was willing to do that, and somebody else was not. So everyone has to have their own path. I just want to emphasize individual differences. Everybody has to have their own path. And that's, I guess we're going to run out of time. I want to give my pearl of wisdom. Because I wrote it out.
Yeah, we're getting real close to the end of our time. So we're gonna do those quickly and then we'll wrap up.
I'll do that. It's never too early to think about retirement. Many undergraduates who take adult development and aging find the topic important. I started my career in 1971 at age 29 and knew a lot about lifespan development and gerontology then. Now at 80, I have learned more. Individual differences and intervention are key concepts. There is no one right way to retirement. Each of us needs to take our own path. We can choose to plan, or we can just let things happen.
And Dr. Heye, yeah.
Okay. I think that reflecting on your career and valuing it, and just being able to remember but have no regrets about things that you do. I think sometimes faculty members, Dr. Stearns talked about, some people are actually bitter. They focus on some of the more negative things than the positive things. The other thing is that, and I mentioned it before, maintain those relationships during the crush of your career, so that when you decide that this isn't what you want to do anymore, that those relationships are still there or can be restored. And I think the other thing is there are relationships, professional and personal, that sometimes don't continue to serve you in retirement, that may be more of a drain. And I think there are times when you really need to reflect on that and then let it go, let those relationships go. And lastly, the notebook. That was my favorite thing during my dissertation. And during the years that I worked, I kept a notebook, and then it turned into 2 notebooks. But the notes in those notebooks reflected all my desires, learning about this native plant or that native plant, or finding out why this is that, and what about that tree, and why is that have hypoxylin, and those kinds of things, as well as political things. And I kept that book, and I have to honestly say, I was looking at it a couple of months ago, and I thought, the first book, I think I've done everything that I wrote down in the book. But when I put it in the book, then I didn't worry about it. It's like, I know it's there, and when I'm ready, I'll go back to it. Well, I didn't have to go back to it, because just with retirement, it just automatically happened, over time.
And that's really just great kind of perspective from both of you. So thank you so much for today. And we're going to need to close our conversation for now, but we encourage our audience members to reflect on your own retirement. what steps should you be taking now to prepare for that retirement someday? And what tips that were offered today really resonate with you that you can jumpstart your own planning. Financial planning is essential, and there's some resources available through your employer. You should take advantage of those and check it out. And if you're contemplating it in the near future, you can check out the GSA Visiting Scholars Program that I've been part of. That was my landing pad coming out of retirement to become more engaged with GSA. And it's a wonderful program, and we can share links with that in our follow-up email. Please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their time and their career experiences and their perspective today. And we thank our work group members who planned the career conversation and all of you who put some really interesting comments. I wish we had so much more time to talk about this. I think we may have to have a follow-up. And we want to also thank Gina Schoen at GSA, who's done all the coordinating behind the scenes for this today. Always appreciate her good work. And we're going to send out a brief survey after the event so you can provide feedback and help us plan future career conversations. This will be available on the GSA website as well afterwards. It takes a little while to get it up there, but you'll see it in our library. So thank you all. Very interesting today.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.